In this video, we will look at some more ways of taking decisions with JavaScript. So you've learned about the if-else statement in order to take decisions, but there are more ways of doing this. And so the first thing that we're going to look at is the ternary operator, which is also called the conditional operator. And it is an operator that basically allows us to write like an if-else statement all in one line. Let's take a look at how that works. And again, I'm bringing back my first name variable here. And then we're also going to set the age to 16. And so now let's use the ternary operator in order to log to the console if John drinks a beer or if he drinks juice, depending on his age. Okay, so let's say age greater or equal to 18, which is the legal age at which you could start drinking, at least in Europe, maybe not in the US. Okay, so we start here with the condition. Then we use the question mark. And then we write basically what we want to happen if this condition is true. So this is like the if block in an if-else statement. So in this case, we want to log to the console, console.log. Drinks beer. Okay, so that is the first part. And now we also have to write the else block. Okay, and so for that, we use the colon. And then let's actually go ahead and copy this part here. Drinks juice. Okay, and that's actually it. So this is the ternary operator. And it's called ternary because it has three operands. So basically three parts that interact with the operator. So we have the condition first, then we have the if block here basically, and then the else block. So let's now test if that works. And indeed, it now says John drinks juice, and that's because he is younger than 18. If you set it to 22, let's say, then it will say John drinks beer. Okay, let's take a look at another example because we can do even better and assign values to variable using the ternary operator in a very simple way. So let's say that we want to define a variable saying what John can drink. So let's say var drink, and now we can use the conditional operator right here. So age greater or equal than 18. Then the question mark, so basically this is to ask a question. So is John greater or equal than 18? And if he is, well, then we can say beer. And if he's not, then we can say juice. And that's it. So basically the result of this entire code here will be beer if the age is greater or equal than 18, and it will be juice if not. And this result will then be assigned to the drink variable. Okay? So again, this is an operator here again, and so an operator always has a result, just like we saw before with any of the other operators. Okay, and so this operator, this ternary operator, is executed, of course, before the assignment operator. Remember, this one is also an operator. And so first we execute this part, which as a result will have either beer or juice, and then that result will be assigned to the drink variable. And so let's log it to the console now, just to make sure that everything is working again. And indeed, it says beer. 14, of course, he will drink juice. Now, just to compare what we would have to do without the ternary operator, let's write out the same thing with an if-else statement. So we would have to write, so var drink equals beer in this case, and then the else block, and then here the juice. Okay, so that would be the alternative here of using this. And so what do you think looks better? Well, it's obviously the ternary operator, right? At least I prefer it very much about having to write something like this in case that we want something as simple as just assigning a value to a variable based on a simple condition like this. Okay, so of course you're not going to do a ternary operator for a rather complex decision, but in case that we have something simple like this, well, it is perfect to not have to use an if-else statement like this. So let me comment out this part here just so you know that this is the same. And all right, so we talked about the ternary operator as an alternative way of writing conditionals, but there is actually even more, and that is the switch statement. And this is like a huge if-else statement where we have multiple else-if clauses basically, and so we can replace that with an easier to understand syntax, okay? Now I'm not a big fan of this myself, but you will see it around when you search for like tutorials on the web, and so it's important that you also know the switch statement. So let's add some comments here before we start. So the ternary operator and then the switch statement. All right, so let's define a job here first. And let's say that John is a teacher. And so now we can use the switch statement. Give us some more space here. All right, so we say switch. And then here between these parentheses, we put what we want to test, what we want to evaluate. Okay, and this will make a lot more sense after you see the entire switch statement. So for now, just let's write the job here, and you will then understand why it works like this. So we switch the job basically, and then we can add a couple of case clauses. So we say case, and then we can say, for example, teacher, then the colon, and then in the next line, we say what we want to happen. So in this case, let's say first name teaches kids how to code. So that's what a teacher does, let's say. So again, if the job is equal to teacher, then this code here will be executed. All right, let's add a couple of more. So case driver, let's say. And now I'm just going to grab this piece of code here. Let's say a driver drives an Uber in Lisbon. And so this is the basic functionality of the switch statement. Okay, so we can add a couple of more cases even. So let's say we also want designer. And then again, our console.log, let's say designs beautiful websites. All right, so what we're doing here is again to compare the job to each of these different cases. So if the job is teacher, then do this. If the job is driver, then do this. If the job is designer, well, then do this. Now, what we have to do here also is to add a break statement. So in here, we have to say break because otherwise it will keep evaluating these next cases. Okay, so even if the job is teacher, it will then keep evaluating these other cases. It will keep basically looking at them and see if they are also true. But we don't want that to happen. And so we have to use the break keyword at the end of this block that we want to execute. So break and here break also. Now, if none of these here applies, we can then add a default. Okay, so all we have to do is to say default and then define what happens in that case. So in this case, well, let's just say that John does something else. And then here, of course, we don't need to break because it's already the last case here anyway. Okay, so if none of these applies, so these are basically like the else if in the if else statement. So in an if else statement, this would be if job equals teacher, then do this, else if driver, then do this here, else if designer, then do this, and then else do this, right? And so this default here is basically our last else in an if else statement. All right, so let's try it out. And so indeed, it now says that John teaches kids how to code because he is a teacher. Now, if we say that he's a driver, then of course, drives an Uber in Lisbon. Now let's say that he is a cop. And so now none of these applies. And so we should end up with John does something else. Great. Now we can also have multiple case clauses for the same piece of code that we want to execute. So for example, if we want to execute this code here, if the job is a teacher, or also let's say instructor, then we can add simply another case here. So case instructor, and then this piece of code here will also be executed if we say instructor. Just to finish, let's try out that. And yeah, so it still works here as it should. So this is here again a simple way of replacing a huge if-else statement. For example, something like this, where we have this if and then else if, and then else, or it could be even longer. And so sometimes a switch statement looks a bit cleaner than having all of these blocks like this. Okay, and actually, since we're working on it, let's actually go ahead, copy this piece of code, and try to replace this if-else statement here with a switch, because that's actually going to work in a slightly different way, and so it's a great opportunity to show you how that could work. So this first switch that I showed you here basically simply switches a variable and compares all of these cases to that variable. But here we have these number ranges, and so it works slightly different, and so it's a great exercise to do this one here as well. So to translate it basically to a switch statement. So in this case, what we want to switch is true. Okay, so we basically want to compare each of the expressions below that we're going to put here in a second to true. And this is a trick to simply make the switch work as an if-else statement with ranges. So our first case will be case age less than 13. And in that case, it will then log this piece to the console, and then don't forget the break. Okay, then the next case is this one, and let's actually go ahead and copy it because we already know how it works at this point. And then log this here to the console so that John is a teenager, and then let's break out of it. So let's complete the code here and then take a closer look at it and see how it works. Okay, so for this case, we want to log this part here to the console, then break out of it. And now finally, we have the else part here. And so for the else part, we are going to use, such as before, the default. So default, and then log that John is a man. All right, and so that's actually it. So we can get rid of this, and so we already translated it here to the switch statement. So we now have all of these conditions here, basically not as strings as we had before. So in this case here, and this is the more usual case of using the switch statement, okay? So where we have like a string that we want to compare with some variable. In this case here, we have basically these logical expressions here that will turn out to be either true or false. And so for example, if this here turns out to be true, so if the age is between 13 and 20, well, then this here is true and all of the others are false. And remember that we switched true. And so the case that will be true will then be the one that is executed. Okay, so let's try that out. And the age I think is not, actually it is defined as 14. Let's put it again here, so we don't have to go up and down to test this. So let's say that he is 10 now, and so let's check it out. So John is a boy, great. Change it to 17, now he's a teenager, now 22 again, a young man, and a man. So all of these now work. So these are two ways of using switch statements, and they can be useful again in case that we have a long if-else statement with lots of else-ifs. So this can look a bit cleaner here. All right, and so that's 3 ways in which we can write conditional code. So the if-else statement, the ternary operator, and the switch statement.